Chapter 9. The enemy inside the wall. The fort was attacked from within as well as from outside. One breath after Dorian Pike asked who had called aside worthless, the North Horn began to howl, and before the sound had finished tearing through the corridor, a second alarm answered from somewhere inside the keep. Blur, plusser, not wall contact, not routine. A scream followed it, not from outside the stone, from under our feet. Alden moved first. He always did. His head turned once toward the wall stair, once toward the lower keep passage, and in that glance I saw the choice arrive already sharpened. Dorian's face changed faster than mine. The substructure, he said. He didn't sound frightened. He sounded confirmed. A runner came around the corridor, turned hard enough to strike the wall with one shoulder. Blood striped his sleeve. Not much. Enough. He saw Alden, swallowed once, and forced air back into his lungs. Crow North Wall under rush. Hounds and climbers. But inside, too. 2 sentries dead by the old rear stair. Will wear lock broken. Captain once. Alden had him by the arm before the sentence ended. How many below? Don't know. Heard steel, and one of the engineers never came back up. Dorian swore, not loudly, but with scholarship stripped clean off the word. Alden let go of the runner and said, "Get Soren, that Pike was right." The runner was already moving again before the order fully landed. For one stupid half-second I remained where I stood, not frozen exactly, but still inside the last conversation. Aside, worthless, the question Dorian had asked with that bare disbelief in his voice. Then the fort itself shook under a heavy impact from the north wall, and the moment ended. Alden looked at me once. With me. So I went. We took the lower keep stair at a pace that would have killed an older man on whetstone. Shouts crossed above us from the yard. The north horn sounded again, and this time I heard answering cries from the parapet archers calling range, officers yelling for sand, someone screaming for the closure team at a gate I couldn't see. Inside the stairwell the air smelled wrong. Not only torch smoke and damp line. Something sharper had gotten into it. Resin, maybe. Burned pitch or treated wood. The same dark preservative smell that had clung faintly to the hidden stakes in the eastern woods. Dorian smelled it too. He snapped his head toward the lower turn. Alden grunted once. I noticed. The old rear stair beneath the keep was not supposed to be busy. I knew that from my earlier time below Calder, from Alden's footwork drills in the substructure and Tara's irritated warnings about splitting my head on underused stone. Now the passage below us threw back the noise of close fighting from walls too tight to soften it. Steel! Boots! A short wet choking sound that might have been a man discovering his throat had changed shape. We broke into the lower corridor together. 2 bodies lay just beyond the stair mouth. Both fort men by the cut of their gambesons, both already past help. One had died with the keys still half drawn from his belt ring. The other lay against the wall under a spray of blood too high and narrow to mistake for anything but a fast killing line. 3 more soldiers held the bend toward the old access passage. One was bleeding from the scalp. Another had his shield braced wrong because his off arm no longer wanted to lift cleanly. All 3 wore the expression of men fighting in a place that had stopped making sense 2 minutes ago and might stop making sense harder in the next one. Captain Soren stood among them with a drawn sword and no cloak, which meant he had left whatever meeting or meal or paperwork the alarm had struck him out of halfway through. He saw Alden and did not waste time on questions. 2 from inside, he said. Maybe more came through the lower drain. 1 engineer dead. 1 missing. They're trying for the old sealed section. That landed exactly where Dorian's face had been pointing since the first alarm. Outer attack? Alden asked. Real enough to tie the wall, Soren said. Not full commitment. Pressure. Cover, Dorian said. Soren cut him a hard look. Yes, he said. I get her. He pointed with his sword toward the bend. They've barred the first turn with debris and tarred sacks. Smoke if we fire it. Choke point if we don't. One of the bastards used a fort phrase before he killed the sentry, which means they either had uniforms, ears inside, or worse. Worse is lazy, Dorian said. Soren's patience thinned visibly. Then pick a more expensive word later. Right now I need the lower passage held and that section not opened. Alden stepped past him. We'll take the turn. Soren caught my eye only long enough to register that I was there, armed, and not yet dead. Cross, he said. You know the lower floor. Yes. Then stop standing like a report writer and move. That was fair enough that it worked. We advanced toward the bend in a staggered line because the corridor would not permit anything cleaner. Alden in front, 1 wounded infantryman with shield still usable, me on his right half step back, Dorian behind with no business in a kill lane and no willingness to leave it, then 2 more soldiers dragging the tarred sacks aside far enough to give us passage without fully losing the choke. The first enemy came through this smoke, not abyssal, human, at least human enough. A fort coat over dark quilted armor, 1 sleeve torn, face wrapped to the nose against the resin haze. He carried a short chopping blade in one hand and a hooked iron wedge in the other, and he came in low not like a duelist but like a man whose real work waited 3 rooms deeper and who wanted us dead only because we were between him and it. Alden met him clean. The front exchange happened too fast to admire. Steel on steel, Alden's blade taking the chop outside line while the shieldman beside him rammed forward into the man's chest. The enemy staggered, recovered, and tried to turn the iron wedge under the shield rim toward the armpit gap. I moved before the line fully formed, not bravely, usefully. My shield came up from the right at the wrong angle for a proper block and exactly the right angle to spoil the wedge's path. The impact rang up my forearm. I let the force slide instead of taking it square, and in the same motion stepped half a pace left so the wounded shieldman had room to drive through rather than collide with me. That was the first clear turn in the fight. Block. And also open a lane. The wedge scraped sparks off my rim instead of entering flesh. The shieldman hit the infiltrator fully then, and Alden's return cut opened the wrapped man from jaw to collar. He fell without any useful answers in him. Good, Alden said, already moving. No time for more. We hit the first turn and found the debris jam Soren described. Broken crate wood, pitch-smeared sacks, and one engineer's cart tipped sideways across the narrow mouth to make a killing angle out of an old utility bend. Beyond it, a second body in engineer leather lay on the floor with the back of his skull ruined. Dorian crouched long enough to look at the dead engineer's hands. Dragged here after. How can you tell? I asked. Because he died face down and was turned. He rose and said more sharply, move the cart, not the sacks. If they catch fire, we choke before the enemy does. We shifted the cart by inches under pressure from the corridor beyond. Something struck the far side twice while we moved it metal, fast, testing whether fear would make us rush. It almost worked. When the gap opened, a hooked arm shot through. Not human now. The thing attached to the cane after a heartbeat later, all white bloodshot and narrow faceless head, one of the same Abyssal Scout class I had seen in the Bothan before but slimmer here, the body adapted to corridor speed instead of open ground rush. Its hook skimmed over the top of the moved cart and came for Dorian's throat because he was the only one not holding a shield. I was closer. I intercepted badly and on instinct. Shield up, catch the hook high, don't die. The impact should have bound me to the line and left the inside open. Instead, the familiar slip in force shaved the strike outward by inches. In those inches, Alden stepped past my shoulder and drove his sword through the scout's upper chest seam. The thing screamed, high and metallic, and thrashed against the blade. A second hook flashed from below. This one would have taken Alden's knee. I cut down reflexively with the short sword. The blade bit, the weak extra shove rode the end of the strike, and the hook missed the joint by a fraction. The scout's arm smashed into the wall instead. Alden ripped free and killed it with a second thrust through the split pale line of its face. Dorian looked at me once. Not gratitude, not yet. Recognition. There, he said. No one explained what they meant because the corridor gave us no room for philosophy. We pushed through the turn. Smoke thickened beyond it, not from open fire but from some smoldering compound packed into the sacks and cracks at the edge of the passage. My eyes watered immediately. The lower keep seemed to have lost all ordinary dimensions. Every room felt too close, every ceiling lower, every sound more specific. Ahead, boots pounded stone. One sat. Hard to tell in the haze. The missing engineer's voice suddenly rose from deeper in the old access hall. Please, it cut off in a sound I hated on sight though I could not see it. Alden's pace changed. Not faster exactly. More final. We came out into the broaders of the chamber beneath to keep the same cistern room where he had taught me how to feel the floor through bare feet, now half filled with smoke and but light from 2 lanterns overturned on the stone. Shock lines from old drills still ghosted faintly under boot tracks and blood. One man knelt near the south wall with his hands bound to a ring bolt. The missing engineer. Alive. Face ruined by beating enough that one eye had nearly sealed itself. Another shape in Ford colors lay dead near the cistern, throat open. At the far corridor, the sealed side, the one Alden had once called bad footing and old roots, 3 figures worked the collapsed door seam with tools. 2 human, 1 not. The humans had stripped off Ford cloaks and no longer bothered pretending. Dark leather overchain. Faces uncovered now, 1 narrow and bearded, 1 bald with a burn scar down the neck. Both carried the same hooked iron wedges we had already seen. Between them moved a second Abyssal Scout, smaller and quicker than the first, its forelimbs fitted with metal braces wound in black cord and resin, as if someone had adapted its killing body to pry and tear where hands would fail. That was worse than an ambush, because it meant cooperation. One of the men saw us first. Now, he shouted. The scout lunged not toward the door but toward the bound engineer. Human shields are old. Frontier war does not outgrow ugliness by pretending otherwise. Alden changed line instantly. So did I. This is where terror tried to take the body back from skill. If the scout killed the engineer, the room's shape would collapse around the grief and the shock. If it ignored him and hit Dorian or the nearest soldier instead, the same thing. I saw all possible failures at once, and for one heart kick every limb wanted a different answer. Then the last week snapped together hard enough to hurt. I moved, not only to block and place. My first step cut toward the engineer's side, not the scout's center, forcing the attack line to cross my shield if it wanted the throat. At the same time I shouted, left, not for myself, for Jessa, who had just reached the chamber mouth behind us with spear in hand and needed one clean lane, not my body in it. The scout hit. I caught one hook on the shield rim and let the force run off its ideal path instead of dead binding. The second hook came lower, but because I had stepped toward the engineer rather than straight in, its body had to twist more than it wanted. That twist gave Jessa the lane. Her spear drove through the scout's side seam while I was still absorbing the first blow. Dual action, defend, and also open the kill line for someone else. The engineer lived. The scout did not die cleanly, but it fell away from him shrieking. Alden met the first human saboteur at the sealed seam and forced him back from the wedge point. The bearded man moved well enough to tell me he was no random cutthroat, not night school polish, war flexibility. He fought to return to the seam more than to win the duel, every step angled toward his real work. The second saboteur bolted for the left corridor the moment Jess's spear landed. Not retreat, messenger, or backup plan. He brushed past the cistern and almost got through the smoke. I lunged after him, too far to strike properly, close enough only to catch cloth. My fingers hit the back of his sleeve for less than a second. Touch, and also leave. The crude thread mark answered more sharply than it ever had on bark. His body already carried intent, malice, purpose, whatever the explanation. The mark took and held. He tore free and vanished into the left passage. But I knew where. Not by sight. By that faint pull in attention. Thin and wrong and unmistakably moving away through stone. I shouted. One running. Ket's crossbow snapped from the chamber entrance. The bolt struck wall and sparked. Too late. The fleeing man was already around the turn. Dorian heard my call and looked at me, really looked, through smoke and noise. You marked him. Yes. Can you follow? At range maybe. Not far. Do it. Alden barked over steel from the sealed seam. Not alone. Pell came with me before the sentence fully ended, shield up, broad body making a wall where the side passage narrowed again. We took the left turn into dark stone still smelling of old drain water and fresh resin. The thread mark tugged ahead of me like an invisible string in a current. Enough. Pell risked one glance sideways. You can feel him? Something of him. That sounds unhealthy. It is. We found him at the lower fork. He had reached his second old service door, half-rotted and usually locked against nothing important. Now it hung open. He was on one knee beside a floor hatch smaller than the main sealed section, hammering a dark metal spike into a seam line cut with branching marks I recognized from the ruined stones in the woods. He saw us and rose with knife first, wedge gone. The spike remained embedded, abyssal sigil. I knew it before anyone named it. The metal head had been worked into a branching emblem around a central cut, dark as old blood, the same descending geometry as the hidden stakes, but sharpened into a symbol instead of a pattern. He came for Pell because Pell's shield blocked the corridor. Pell met him cleanly and would probably have won on strength alone if the man had cared to stay on the shield line. He didn't. He cut low, rolled off contact, and tried to use Pell's momentum to slip past toward me and deeper below. That was the mistake I nearly made too often in drills, thinking the first engagement was the whole act. This time I saw the second line. As Pell bound the knife high, I stepped off center instead of straight in, hit the saboteur's forearm with my shield edge, and used the contact not only to stop him but to turn him across the corridor mouth where Pell could finish the push, block, and also redirect. The man lost footing on wet stone. Pell smashed him into the wall. I cut once through the exposed side of the neck. The weak shove at the end of the strike spoiled his attempt to tuck chin and shoulder. Not much. Enough. He went down and did not rise again. For a breath, the lower fork held still. Then the embedded spike in the seam pulsed once with a dull interior vibration that ran through the floor into my boots. Not imagination. Will. Pell felt it too. His face changed. What in God's name? No God I know, I said. The pull of the thread mark was gone. Its owner had stopped. I crouched by the spike and did not touch it. Close up, the sigil looked even worse. Branching lines fed into a central cut like channels guiding something downward. Black resin crusted the shaft where it met the stone seam, and the seam itself had widened by less than a finger's width around it. Someone had prepared this. Not a random spike. A key, wedge, or signal. Hal looked back toward the main chamber. Crow needs to see this. Yes. He hauled the body aside with one boot while I memorized the sigil as fast as I could. When we ran back, the vibration in the floor did not repeat, but the knowledge of it stayed in my teeth. The chamber fight had shifted while we were gone. Alden had killed the bearded saboteur, but not before taking a slice across the outer arm. Jessa and one infantryman held the surviving abyssal scout near the cistern while Ket fired from the mouth whenever anyone's body wasn't in his line. Dorian, of all impossible things, had a short engineer's hammer in one hand and was using it to break the black wedges the dead saboteurs had driven into the sealed seam. "Left fork," I shouted. "Another hatch. Sigil spike in the floor." Dorian wheeled on me. "What sigil?" "No time," Alden said. "There wasn't." The surviving scout broke from Jessa's spear line with a sound like metal tearing from wet hide and came straight through the smoke at Dorian's head. I was closer again, terrified again. This time the terror came cleaner because the body had fewer options. I blocked high with the shield, let the force slip, and in the same instant drove my right shoulder into Dorian's back hard enough to throw him sideways out of the center line. Defend, and also displace the scholar. The hook tore across the shield boss and glanced off stone. I pivoted with it not graceful, barely controlled, and because the pivot had already opened my flank, Alden stepped through the place I had just left and cut the scout low through one knee joint. It folded. Jessa's spear took the throat seam. Ket's next bolt buried in the skull. The chamber went briefly and brutally quiet. Not silence. Breathing, someone groaning, resin crackle, the bound engineer trying to remember how lungs worked, but quiet enough that everyone heard the second vibration from the left fork when it came. Thither. Longer. The floor answered like a buried door objecting to its own memory. Dorian's eyes went to me first, then to the left passage. "Show me." Alden did not argue. That frightened me more than if he had. We moved at once. Soren sent 2 more soldiers down from the keep above just as we entered the left fork, both already short of breath from fighting on the inner levels. Tar appeared behind them long enough to shove a bandage at the wounded infantryman and curse us all with compact professional violence before vanishing back toward whoever was bleeding more openly upstairs. At the small hatch chamber, Dorian dropped to one knee beside the embedded spike without any fear I could see. That didn't mean he felt none, only that fear had learned its place under curiosity and duty a long time ago. He examined the sigil for 2 breaths and hissed air through his teeth. "Abyssal adaptation," he said. Alden stood over him, sword still wet. Meaning someone learned enough of the old seam language to force resonance into it with rupture marks. Dorian pointed with the engineer's hammer. "This is not random sabotage. They are trying to wake or open specific lower points." I looked from the spike to the seam. "Why this hatch too?" "Because secondary accesses exist for a reason," he said. "Drain, maintenance, support chamber, I don't know yet." His voice hardened. But they knew. That was the revelation sitting there in cold stone between us. Not fort harassment, not general panic, not even the ruin in the woods alone. A target inside Calder, a section below. Alden crouched without taking eyes off the darker end of the passage beyond the hatched chamber. "And the outer wall?" "Cover," Dorian said. "Pressure enough to pull command attention upward while the internal team worked the seams." Soren arrived then, face stark with the effort of containing 2 battles in one fort. He took in the spike, the hatch, the dead saboteur at the wall, and Dorian's expression. "They weren't after my stores." "No," Dorian said. "Or my gate." "No." Soren's jaw set. "Then what?" Dorian looked at the floor seam. "This?" No one liked the simplicity of that. Soren knelt and examined the sigil with a soldier's practicality rather than a scholar's hunger. "Can you pull it?" "Maybe." "Wrongly." Dorian's eyes flicked up. "If it's keyed to the seam, yanking could worsen the resonance or collapse the lip. If we wedge it, cut the resin, and relieve pressure first." The third vibration came before he finished. This time not from the hatch, from deeper below the keep. A heavy answering thud rolled through the stone from the direction of the main sealed section in the cistern chamber, as if something much larger had heard the smaller seam ring and moved once in reply. Everyone in the hatch room went still. The fort above us continued screaming its war at the north wall. Below, old Calder listened to itself wake. Dorian stood so quickly his shoulders struck the wall. That we went. The cistern chamber had changed in the minute we were gone. Not by a great visible miracle. Worse than that. The sealed of seen of of blood the night is film on a edge, and the wedges Dorian that you said also the get him is the feel for their souls. The bound engineer was still alive. Jessa had cut him free and dragged him near the stair mouth. Ket guarded the chamber entrance with crossbow half drawn, the weapon shaking only because the last hour had asked too much of anyone's arms. Alden took one look at the seam and swore. "Do it," Soren said to Dorian. "Whatever the careful version is." Dorian was already moving. He snapped orders with brutal efficiency. "Water on the wedges first. Not flood, just the resin line. Crow, pressure here if it lifts. Cross, I need the hammer, not your fear. Jessa, if the seam opens more than a hand width you pull me by force and we argue later." That last line might have been humor in a different world. Here it was only instruction. I knelt beside him with the engineer's hammer and one of the smaller pry bars from the dead saboteurs. Up close, the wedges smelled of pitch, old blood, and something mineral that turned the inside of my nose cold. Each bore the same abyssal sigil cut into blackened metal. Dorian pointed to the first. Tap there, not the head, the shoulder. I obeyed. The metal rang wrong, not like iron and stone, like iron interrupting something beneath the stone. Dorian slid the pry bar in and levered carefully while Soren dripped water along the resin seam from his skin. The black coating hissed, softened, and released an ugly bitter odor. Again, Dorian said. I struck. The wedge shifted. At the far edge of the timber, all the way away, the low of the blood and the seam where dirty this blood will reveal the with the within the fill the shield blood will of clustering of the visible ranks. Another, he said, not to Dorian. To me. I moved to the second wedge. This was where the fight turned from terror into focus clearly enough that I could feel the difference. The fear remained. It just lost command. One blow where Dorian needed it. One pry. One breath. Watch the seam. Watch Alden's shoulder line. Watch Jess's spear point at the chamber mouth because if something came down on us now, it would not wait politely for the seal work to finish. Action and something alongside. Not beautiful. Functional. I tapped the second wedge shoulder. At the same time I let the eyes flick to the chamber entrance and back, counting bodies without losing the strike line. I braced the pry bar under Dorian's direction and used the tiny carry at the end of a committed shove to free another fraction of the metal without overcommitting my weight. He noticed. Of course he did. There, he said under his breath. Not now. Alden warned. Especially now. Dorian snapped back. The second wedge came free with a shriek of metal on stone. The chamber trembled harder. The seam in the south wall widened by another finger's width and exhaled air colder than the room. Not rot. Not grave cold. Something drier and older. Jessa took one involuntary step back. Ket said, tell me that's good. No, Dorian said. That honesty was almost a relief. Then the chamber mouth exploded inward. Not from the seam. From the old access corridor we had already fought through. A third human infiltrator came in under smoke and grit, having hidden or doubled back while we were focused on the seals. He wore no forward colors now, only dark leather and a hood pushed back from a narrow scarred face. In his right hand he held another sigil spike. In his left, a short recurved blade meant for tight work. He did not attack the nearest soldier. He went straight for Dorian. That told me more than any confession could have. The scholar saw him at the same instant I did, but his hands were full on the pry bar. I moved because the line existed and because if I did not move Dorian would take the blade under the jaw before he ever got to the words explaining why. Shield up. Step across. Intercept high. But the infiltrator changed midline, cutting not for the throat after all, but low toward Dorian's wrist to disable the hand working the seam. That was where dual action stopped being a theory and became the only way I stayed relevant. I caught the knife on the shield rim and let it skid outward. At the same time, instead of planting dead in front of Dorian, I kept the turn going and used my shoulder to shove the scholar behind the cistern lip, deflect, and also remove the target. The infiltrator recovered faster than I liked. His free hand came up with his sigil spike, and only then did I understand he meant to drive it into the main seam, not kill us first. I cut at the spike arm. He twisted. My blade bit forearm instead of wrist. The weak extra shove at the end of the strike spoiled his balance enough that the spike missed the crack by inches and rang against stone. Alden hit him then from the right. Not cleanly. The man had trained for this kind of ugly close work and rolled inside the first cut, taking the slice across the back instead of the spine. But Alden's arrival forced him off the seam. Soren piled in from the left. The chamber shrank to killing distance. I saw very little clearly for the next several breaths. Hands, steel, shoulder lines. Alden's boot pinning the fallen spike. The infiltrator trying every ugly angle to reach it again because the weapon in his hand mattered less than that piece of black iron on the floor. I blocked one low cut from Soren's blind side and let the force slide past his knee rather than into it. Alden's sword flashed for the infiltrator's neck. The man dipped under it and drove his recurved blade up under Alden's ribs. Everything slowed. Not truly. Just enough that I watched the line happen and hated my own distance from it. Alden twisted as he saw it too, taking the worst of the thrust off center. It still went in. He killed the man anyway. The return cut took the infiltrator across the throat so hard it half turned him around before he dropped over the sigil spike. Blood hit the seam stones in a hot bright sheet. Alden stayed standing for one breath more through discipline alone. Then he put a hand to his side and I saw the red already forcing through his fingers. The chamber lost all sound for me at that exact moment. Not truly. Only in the head. Then it all rushed back at once. Jessa shouting his name. Soren yelling for Tara. Dorian grabbing the last wedge and levering with both hands now that the assassin was down. Ket cursing from the entrance because the north fight above had started screaming again and he could hear it through the stair. I moved to Alden before the rest of me finished deciding. He looked at my face, then at my hands, then down at the blood. Not through, he said. That was the first thing out of him. Not comfort. Assessment. The blade had gone and under the lower ribs on the right side, angled upward but not deep enough, maybe, to take everything at once. Maybe. Blood is a liar in stone rooms. It looks like finality while arguments are still being held inside the body. Sit, I said. He almost laughed at that. Instead he said, you are not in command. No. Then stop sounding like it. Even wounded, he found the line. Soren got under one arm. I got the other. We lowered him against the cistern while Tara came at a full run from the corridor with 2 assistants and the expression of a woman whose worst opinion of everyone present had just been justified in detail. What did you do now? She snapped, dropping to her knees in the blood and not caring. Then she saw the wound and the sarcasm vanish from her face as if cut free. Pressure. Now, I put both hands where she directed. Alden's blood came hot through my fingers at once. Tara's hands moved faster than sight. Knife cutting cloth. Compressed from satchel. Fingers checking depth with the speed of obscene expertise. Do not pull anything if I don't tell you, she said to no one and everyone. Dorian finally tore the last wedge free. The chamber shuddered once more, then slowly stopped answering. Not safe. Quiet. A difference big enough to feel in the bones. He turned from the seam and looked at the dead infiltrator, the sigil spike half under the body, the black dust along the crack line, and Alden bleeding against the cistern. His face had gone white under the grime. They weren't attacking Calder, he said. No one answered because the truth was already in the room. Dorian looked at the sealed wall as if it had just spoken to him in a language he hated for being partly understood. The outer rush, the inside team, the secondary hatch, the sigil wedges. This was never about the fort. He pointed at the cracked south seam. They wanted the sealed section. That was the reveal. It should have felt clarifying. Instead it lit rage in me so hard and cold it almost made the hand steadier on Alden's wound. Not because the answer was abstractly offensive, because Alden's blood was on my skin while Dorian named the shape I had failed to stop in time. We had killed them, broken the wedges, held the room, saved the engineer, maybe kept whatever lay below from opening cleanly. Partial success. Alden still bled. The hate in that was clean enough to sharpen thought. I looked at the seam while Tara worked and saw more now that the dust had settled. The carved line around it was not random old masonry. It matched the central platform geometry from the eastern ruin in simplified form, branching channels feeding toward a center, a section of invocation language built into Calder's deeper roots long before the fort above wore its current name. Calder had roots, Alden said. Now one of those roots had been marked for opening by abyssal sigils and human hands. Soren stood over the dead infiltrator and nudged the body off the spike with his boot. The black iron head caught lantern light and showed the branching emblem clearly for the first time to everyone present. Jessa looked at it and said, that thing was meant to fit there. Yes, Dorian said. Can it still? His answer took too long. Tara snapped without looking up. If this room is about to become less sealed, I would enjoy knowing before I waste dressings on a man who will be buried in the collapse anyway. Dorian crouched by the seam again, but this time caution had become something harsher. No, he said at last. Not immediately. We broke the sequence. Maybe, Soren repeated. It's an honest maybe. No one seemed grateful for honesty then. Alden's hand found my wrist once through the pressure and blood. I looked down. His face had gone pale, in the way strong men hate most because it is not negotiable. Sweat stood at the temples. The gray in his eyes had not dulled. That might have been worse. Clear pain is harder to ignore than dazed pain. You saw it, he said. I leaned closer to hear. What? In the fight? His breath shortened once under Tara's hands. The second line. I stared at him. He was bleeding half out onto old stone and still talking about combat shape. Tara heard and snapped. If he says one more instructive thing before I get this bound, I will hit him with a tray. Alden ignored her. You're doing it, he said to me. What those stones showed. Roughly. Ugly. But real. The words landed with a rage already lived and gave it direction. I could not answer properly. Not with his blood under my hands and the chamber still smelling of resin, old dust, and almost open things. So I said only, not enough. Alden's mouth moved once. It might have been agreement. Or not. Tara shoved me back an inch with her shoulder. Enough talking from both of you. I need breath, not philosophy. I gave her the room because there was no help in arguing with competence. Dorian stood slowly from the seam and looked from the spike to the wall to the smaller server's passage where the first hatch had answered onto the floor. Then he looked at me, not the same way as before in the corridor when he asked who had called the skill worthless. This was sharper, more burdened. He seemed to be measuring me against the chamber itself and disliking how some of the lines matched. I need every note you've kept, he said. Now, tonight. Soren cut in. You'll get them after we lock this level down and not before. Dorian did not even look at him. This changes the whole frame. I know, Soren said. No, Dorian replied, finally turning. You know it changes your fort. I know it changes the question. No one had breath left to ask what question. Outside the chamber, boots thundered down the stair as more soldiers arrived to secure the lower level. The North Horn had fallen silent at last, which did not mean peace. It meant the outer push had either broken off or found a new distance from which to wait. Above us, Calder still lived. Below us, something old had been targeted and almost reached. And at the center of the room, Alden Crow bled while Tara Quill fought the practical war that mattered most in that instant. Soren began barking orders. Seal both lower approaches. Recover the bodies. Get the engineer to a cot if he could stand. Double guard on every substructure stair. No one touches the south seam again without Pike present and 3 more lamps. I heard the words. They did not fully settle, because my eyes kept returning to the black sigil spike on the floor and the crack line in the wall beyond it. Someone had known what lay beneath Calder mattered. Someone had prepared the routes in the woods, the beast pressures on the roads, the infiltrators, the wedges, the timing with the outer assault. That knowledge existed somewhere outside this room, and I had not been enough, not yet, to keep Alden from paying for it in blood. When Tara finally let us lift him, it was with the tight-clipped authority she used only when fear had been reduced to work and work had turned mean. Careful, not slow. I want him upstairs before this room decides to become more interesting. Soren took one side. I took the other. Alden's weight leaned heavier now, conscious still. Vele. As we reached the chamber threshold, the floor gave one last faint tremor under our boots, so slight that I might have dismissed it on any other day. Not now. I looked back. The south seam remained closed, mostly, but in the finger-width crack where black dust still clung, something deeper than darkness held for a moment and did not look empty. Chapter 10. Polished stone back in the capital, mud and survival counted less than spectacle and clean reports. That truth hit before the gates fully opened. Halcyon rose out of autumn haze in white stone, blue tile, and gold trim bright enough to make a frontierman squint after too many weeks under Calder's weather. The road broadening into the capital had been swept. The hour-check winds smelled of oil, hot bread, horse leather drive on purpose, and the faint flower water of the city people seemed to put on to everything they wanted to pretend did not stink of bodies. Even the guards' boots were clean. Mine were not. I had done what Tara Quill ordered before sending me out with Dorian Pike and Captain Soren's sealed papers. The mud had been scrubbed. The worst of the blood had been washed from the seams. The leather had been oiled. Still, frontier use does not leave quietly. It remains in the scuffs, the nicks, the way cloth hangs after repeated weather and bad sleep. My cloak sat rough on the shoulders compared to the city wool around us, and the short sword at my side looked exactly what it was, serviceable, sharpened often, not made for display. Dorian rode the whole way with the expression of a man chewing nails in his sleep and finding them insufficiently bitter by daylight. He had spent most of the trip rewriting his report 3 different ways, one version honest, one version survivable, and one version he called the form required to pass through polite cowards without their choking. I had asked him once which version Captain Soren would actually send. All of them, Dorian said. That seems excessive. That is because you still believe a report is meant to inform. Then he went back to writing while the wheels turned south. We entered Halcyon under formal clearance without fanfare because the paperwork named urgency and sealed military review but not triumph. Good. I had no patience left for fanfare. The city still produced some on its own regardless. Trumpet calls drifted from a training court near the inner avenue. Temple bells marked the late hour with measured self-importance. A line of young nobles in bright coats crossed one square laughing at some private injury too small to count as pain. No one looking at our wagon would have guessed that the lower stones of Fort Calder had nearly been opened from within while the north wall took blood and hooks. That was the point. The capital specialized in surfaces that kept ugly truths from bleeding upward. A page in palace colors met us at the military annex gate and took us not to the royal hall proper, but to the administrative wing built against its eastern side. Not marble grandeur, polished restraint, good stone, thick carpets, serious lamps, walls hung with maps rather than portraits, and clerks moving fast enough to suggest importance while still preserving the illusion that paper commanded steel. Alden Crow was not with us. That absence sat in my chest the whole ride south and sharpened now that I crossed into Halcyon's ordered hallways. Tara had let him travel only as far as sitting upright without looking like a man being held together by argument, which meant not at all. The wound under the ribs had missed the worst by inches and punished him anyway. When I left Calder, he was pale, foul-tempered, fully conscious, and furious that he could not stand in the command room while his own fort's deeper roots were being discussed by other men. He had said, from the infirmary cut while Tara changed the dressing with brisk cruelty, "Don't let them polish the truth lat." Tara, who was holding a bloody compress at the time, answered for me. as if I would send anyone less stubborn than you two into this city. Then she had pointed at me with forceps and added, do not mistake official interests for understanding. Also do not come back with a worse headache than the one you left with, or I'll have proof the capital makes people stupider. That was the nearest thing to farewell I received. Now I stood in Halcyon's annex corridor while a clerk asked for our papers, and Dorian handed over only the least useful copy of the report first out of pure spite. The clerk read the opening lines. His face remained composed, but his eyes flicked once more sharply over the wording when he reached internal breach, unidentified pre-fort substructure, and restricted circulation advised. Please wait here, he said. Of course, Dorian replied in a tone that made the words mean nothing kind. We waited in a chamber furnished with 2 chairs, 1 narrow table, water in a cut-glass decanter, and an arrangement of books no one actually read in that room except to impress other rooms. Through the high windows I could see a piece of the inner training yard where white-clad attendants crossed between weapon racks carrying towels and fresh blades. For a while neither Dorian nor I spoke. Then he said, when they reduce it, listen to what disappears first. What do you expect? He looked at me as if the question had been too clean for the world. The hidden lanes in the woods will become peripheral disturbances. The guided stakes will become illicit border tampering by unknown actors. The motion carvings will become heritage ornamentation pending proper study. The access slab will become a structural concern in legacy stone. The internal assault will become a security lapse by an under-resourced frontier command. He poured himself water and did not drink it. And if any of them are especially offensive, they may call the whole cluster devotional residue. I leaned against the wall rather than sit. That last one still bothers you most. It should bother anyone with a pulse. The door opened before I could answer. We were not taken to a grand audience. That told me enough at once. A grand audience would have meant the court wanted to be seen receiving urgency. Instead, they sent us to a review chamber with 4 officials in no wasted decoration, a military secretary in dark blue, a temple assessor in white and gold who had managed to make piety look like a legal threat, a senior records magistrate with pince-nez and a voice too soft to trust, and 1 court maid whose sleeves were plain enough to suggest actual work rather than public exhibition. Not the top of power, its filtering membrane. Captain Soren's seal got us chairs. Dorian declined to sit. So did I. The secretary began. Master Pike, Evan Cross, thank you for your prompt return from Fort Calder. We have read the preliminary submission and require clarification before forwarding recommendations. Dorian folded his hands behind his back, then asked clearly. The magistrate's eyes cooled by a degree. We would first confirm the scope of the incident. The outer assault did not constitute a full-scale breach attempt. No, Dorian said. It constituted sufficient pressure to tie personnel to the visible threat while an internal team worked against lower sealed architecture. The secretary wrote that down without looking pleased by the sentence. The temple assessor interjected. You are assigning motive with unusual confidence. I am assigning it with the confidence appropriate to men found inside a restricted substructure with prepared wedges keyed to a seam no ordinary raider would have identified, Dorian said. The court mage finally looked up from the report copy. Heed is a strong word. It is the correct one. Silence held for half a breath. Then the magistrate turned to me. You accompanied the survey to the eastern site and were present during the subsequent Calder incident. Yes. Your role in the survey? I helped track the hidden route from the road crossings to the ruin. With what method? Dorian cut in. Relevant. The magistrate did not spare him a glance. I asked Mr. Fruss. So I answered. Crude contact marks. Short range. Enough to preserve uncertain route points through brush and stone. The temple assessor's brows lifted slightly. A personal spell, a skill expression, Dorian said. There was something in his voice then that I could not fully parse. Not quite protective. More like he had become unwilling to let them misfile me cheaply now that the category itself had started mattering. The court mage studied me with new attention. Not interest yet. Calibration. And these marks responded differently to the ruined stones than to ordinary bark. Yes, how differently? They held more strongly, I said. Like the stones carried existing structure. The assessor made a disapproving little sound through the nose, the sort priests use when a soldier speaks about sacred material in practical terms. Dorian heard it too. No, he said flatly, do not do that. The secretary looked up. Do what? Make the mistake where anything old and responsive becomes temple property by temperament. The room cooled. I had seen frontier rooms go cold before valence. This was colder and worse because paper would do the cutting instead. The magistrate adjusted his glasses. Master Pike, no one has claimed ownership. Not yet, Dorian said. But I know that tone. The secretary held up a hand before the exchange hardened further. We are not here to litigate interdepartmental jealousy. We are here to determine classification, risk, and response. There it was. Classification first, truth after, if convenient. They moved through the report piece by piece after that, and Dorian's prediction proved uglily accurate. Every fact that carried dangerous implications attracted language designed to tame it. Guided beast lanes became route interference by unknown hostile agents. The hidden stakes became illicit field markers pending materials analysis. The Eastern Ruin became an unregistered legacy site with possible invocation-adjacent architecture. The instructional carvings became anomalous martial iconography, which sounded like something a clerk could bury alive in 3 cabinets and a lecture. The access slab below the central platform became a compromised structural feature. The black sigil wedges became hostile resonance implements. The internal attack at Calder became a coordinated infiltration incident exploiting existing lower vulnerabilities. At one point, the magistrate suggested localized substructure agitation. Dorian closed his eyes for a full second as if deciding whether murder remained an administratively manageable option. The temple assessor objected not to the risk, but to premature inferential linkage between the Eastern Ruin and Halcyon's summoning architecture. That was when I finally spoke without being asked. They used the same visual language. All 4 officials turned to me. I kept my voice level. Branching descent lines, segmented ring geometry, motion figures cut with attached subsidiary paths. The resemblance isn't decorative. The assessor's expression hardened. You are not trained in comparative sacred notation. No, I said. I was summoned on its floor. That landed. Not enough to win anything. Enough that no one interrupted immediately. The court mage asked, and you observed this in the summoning hall before any current discussion shaped your view. Yes, Dorian added he noticed the older wall band on first exposure before I ever spoke to him of instructional sequence. The magistrate wrote something then, and when the secretary read it back for the record, what survived was smaller and safer than what I had said. Possible resemblance. Provisional correspondence. Witness account. They had scrubbed the meaning until it no longer touched the thing itself. Mud and survival count less than clean reports. There it was again, just in a richer room. By the time the review ended, the recommendation took shape exactly where Dorian feared it would. Restricted circulation, discrete engineering support for Calder, no broad temple notification pending further verification, no public mention of the Eastern Ruin beyond border tampering concerns, immediate archival crosscheck under authorized scholars only. That last phrase kept Dorian in the game at all. It also kept the game in the capital's hands. When the secretary finally said, "These matters are to be handled with suitable discretion," I understood with sudden clarity that discretion was the clean word powerful institutions use when they want truth to move only along approved veins. Dorian understood it too. He bowed only enough to remain technically inside the walls of acceptable insolence. Then I recommend speed before discretion has time to ride into denial. The temple assessor replied, "We recommend patience before alarm spreads faster than comprehension." No one said that alarm had already spread to Calder in hooks and blood. No one needed to. That kind of alarm did not count properly in Halcyon until it climbed a nicer stair. We were dismissed with less ceremony than some officers received for new tack allotments. Outside the chamber, Dorian stopped so abruptly I nearly walked into him. "Well," he said, "that went badly." "That went predictably," he corrected. "Badly is later." He turned down the corridor toward the records wing without further explanation. I did not follow immediately. Because the review chamber sat at the edge of a balcony passage overlooking the inner training court, and from that balcony I could already hear the voices of the others summoned. The capital had gone on training them while Calder bled. Of course it had. Below, in a broad rectangular yard bright with afternoon light, Gareth Voss was cutting through a sequence of armored target frames while 2 knight captains watched with the fixed hunger of men seeing rank justify itself. Sacred Sever blade flared white along the edge with every committed strike. The targets parted cleanly in shining lines and fell in measured pieces. Spectacle and function married beautifully in him. The court loved such marriages. At another end of the yard, Lydia Mara stood in a marked casting ring speaking to 3 robed mages while geometric fire structures rotated around one hand like a patient private constellation. Owen Red crossed a speed lane in blue-white after images that made the attendants flinch late every time. Brent Haver let a pair of instructors hammer his guard with polearms and looked bored by the attempt. Nina Mercer emerged from the attached treatment hall with temple pages at her side. Mila Hart stood near the central platform, spirit weave threads faint around her wrists as she adjusted some detection array for a tactical examiner. For one long breath, the distance between Calder and Halcyon became physical enough to touch. There was nothing wrong with training. Nothing wrong with better equipment, clean stone, or controlled instruction. I was not angry at them for having what the frontier could not afford. What scraped was the mismatch. Alden's blood had still been under my nails that morning. Here the attendants carried polished water jugs. I do not mean that cruelly. Only exactly. Nina saw me first. Of course she did. Healers notice who does not belong to the rhythm of a place. Her eyes lifted toward the balcony, narrowed for half a second at my posture and the way I held my left shoulder, and then she said something to the page beside her before stepping out of line entirely. That pulled other eyes upward in sequence. Mila turned next, then Brent, then Gareth because the others had looked. Owen only after that, quickly and without surprise. Lydia last, because she finished the geometry in her hand before granting any of us the courtesy of her full attention. I stood there in frontier cloth on the annex balcony with sealed review dust still on my sleeves. Gareth lowered his practice blade first. Well, he called up, voice carrying easily. They let the mud back in. Brent barked a laugh. Nina did not. Neither did Mila. I took the stare down because pretending distance existed where it did not would have been cowardice. The training yard smelled of cut straw, hot stone, metal oil, mage residue sharp enough to sting the nose, and the expensive soap attendants used on shared equipment in the capital. When I crossed from the annex passage into the sunlight, I became aware at once of the differences the ride had blurred. My boots were darker, my sword shorter, my stance lower without intending it. The body no longer rested the way it had on the day of summoning, not relaxed into safety, arranged around the assumption that the second danger might not come from the same line as the first. Gareth noticed. So did Owen. So did Lydia, though she hid it better. Brent folded his arms. Thought called her 8 failures whole. It tried, I said. That earned another laugh from him, but thinner this time because the answer had not come out as self-pity. Gareth stepped closer and looked me over with a frankness that would have been insulting from almost anyone else. You changed. Yes, how bad is it up there? Nina cut across before I could answer. How bad is your arm? That made Mila wince slightly, as though she had felt the question land in 2 directions at once. It's fine, I said. Nina gave me the exact look Tara would have if she wore cleaner sleeves and had less patience for excuses in public. No, she said, it isn't. She reached for my wrist without asking and checked the grip line and forearm tension with infuriating speed. I let her because arguing with healers only wastes time and makes them more correct. You're compensating, she said quietly. Still, less than before. That is not the same thing. Gareth was still looking at me, but now his attention had sharpened away from surface and into something more practical. Did Calder see real contact? Yes, with what? Abyssal scouts, infiltrators, coordinated pressure. That pulled Owen fully into the conversation at last. Coordinated how? I hesitated. Not because I did not know. Because the review chamber had taught me exactly how fast language gets stolen once it reaches the capital. Lydia noticed the pause. They restricted the report, she said. Not a guess, a deduction. Her gaze flicked once toward the annex balcony above us and then back to my face. Interesting. Brent snorted. Or routine. Frontier panic grows embellishments on the ride south. Gareth did not look at him. What happened? He asked me again. Mila spoke then, very softly. Was Sir Crow with you? The question shifted the center. I looked at her. She held my gaze only a second before glancing down, but it was enough for me to see the discomfort there. Not guilt exactly. More a tension she had not found a clean use for since the summoning hall. Yes, I said. He was. The air changed when I did not add more. Nina's face tightened first. She read absence the way other people read banners. He was hurt. Yes. How badly? That enough. No one joked after that. Even Brent let the silence settle. Owen was the first to break it, but in the manner of a man rearranging pieces rather than comforting the table. If the capital restricted it, he said, then either the threat is politically inconvenient or the evidence is incomplete. Both, Lydia said before I could answer. She stepped closer then, not into intimacy, but into examination range. Her eyes were cool, exact, always a little too focused for comfort. I was given a summary this morning, she said, not the full report. It mentioned route interference, legacy stone, internal breach, and anomalous martial iconography. Brett made a face. That phrase again. They keep saying it like it means anything. It means the report frightened someone educated enough to hide the useful noun, Lydia said. A corner of Gareth's mouth twitched despite himself. That was the point where things had already begun to change, though I only understood it later. The summoned group gathered in Capital Light, and for the first time since the ritual hall I was not merely the leftover skill standing at the edge of a room waiting to be classified downward. Not restored, not elevated, but no longer invisible in the same way. Some of them looked at me differently now. Not all. Owen remained coolly appraising, measuring output against proven value. Brent still saw a rough auxiliary piece and disliked the possibility that the piece had grown sharp edges offstage. Nina looked at the damage first and everything else after. Mila saw the social wrongness around me and had not found peace with it. Gareth saw field use, and in him that was close to respect. Lydia saw a problem worth thinking about. That last one might have been the most dangerous. She said, "Tell me what you saw on the stone." Lydia, Gareth began. "No," she said, If the report was clean, I want the unswept version. I should have refused outright. Dorian would have approved. Instead, I compromised in the ugly middle. Motion figures, I said. Not ritual poses. Weight transfer. Wrench lines attached to one action. Not decoration. Lydia's face did not change much. Her eyes did. What kind of branch lines? Secondary paths. Follow lines. Interference lines. I searched for the least stolen words. Like one movement was intended to do more than one thing. Brent folded his arms harder. That sounds like bad instruction. It sounds like dense instruction, Lydia said. Owen's expression sharpened by almost nothing. For combat? Yes. Gareth looked from Lydia to me and back. You sure? No, I said. I'm sure it wasn't decorative. That answer pleased Lydia more than certainty would have. Good, she murmured. Certainty this early is usually stupidity. Nina stepped back at last, satisfied only in the way healers are satisfied when the wound has not worsened in the last 30 seconds. You need treatment before whatever comes next, she said. There is no treatment for review chambers. There is for your arm. Brent finally found his footing again in the conversation. So what, then? Old warrior carvings in a ruin. Stakes in the woods. Saboteurs in a fort. Ugly, sure. But if it mattered enough, Central Command would have assigned actual specialists. Lydia turned her head toward him with dangerous slowness. You are speaking beside the obvious point, which is that they assigned none publicly. That landed harder than any rebuke. Owen looked toward the annex wing again. Secrecy. Yes, Lydia said. Mila spoke before anyone else could. Why would they hide it from us? No one answered quickly because the question had too many clean ugly answers. Because summoned assets are controlled by information. Because panic disrupts hierarchy. Because if the kingdom does not understand a thing, it prefers to hold it still before lower status people begin drawing their own conclusions. Because knowledge tied to older combat systems, invocation routes, and frontier vulnerabilities might rearrange who matters. I said only because they're deciding who gets to name it. Mila's mouth tightened. Gareth rolled his shoulders once, looking suddenly less like the public hero candidate from the ritual hall and more like a frontline weapon being told there was a second battlefield he had not been invited to see. That's a foul habit. It's a royal habit, Owen said. That too. Nina looked between us and exhaled through her nose. Fine. Then what did the report leave out besides the carvings? Alden's blood returned to me then, too immediate under the sunlight. I could have lied. Instead, I said, the internal team wasn't trying to breach Calder for stores or walls. They were trying to open something sealed below it that stripped the yard of nearly all its harmlessness. Even Brent's condescension paused there because sealed below it in a frontier fort after a coordinated internal attack is not a phrase anyone with military sense ignores easily. Lydia's gaze hardened fully for the first time. Well, I gave them the version fit for people who had not been in the chamber but still deserved more than the annex had offered. A lower section tied into older architecture. Someone knew it mattered. They brought sigil wedges that matched the seam. The outer assault was cover. Owen asked, was it open? No. Mila's voice came very low. And Sir Crow. He stopped them, I said. The silence after that felt clean and ugly. Not pity. Not yet. Recognition of cost. Brent looked away first, which told me more than if he had apologized for every earlier laugh. People who live inside easy superiority do not know what to do with blood costs unless they can witness them from a distance that protects their own shape. Gareth planted the practice blade tip down on the quartzstone. Can you still move? The question surprised me enough that for a second I thought I had misheard him. Yes, show me. Lydia did not object. Owen did not either. That mattered. Gareth stepped back from the line of us and pointed toward the empty ring near the straw dummies. No scale theatrics, just movement. It wasn't a challenge in the way Brent would have meant one. Not dominance. Verification. I walked into the ring because refusing would have said more than any performance. The quartzstone felt wrong after Calder. Too even, too dry, too honest in all the ways that mattered less to survival. I took one breath, then another, and settled into the simplest sequence I trusted. Advance, to, die, recovery step, shortcut line with no full commitment, drop and rise. Nothing dramatic. I let the body move the way Alden had shaped it weight carried through the next act, not spent entirely in the current one. On the second turn I used the breath smoothing under the step because it came naturally now when the motion was honest. On the guard change I let the line slip a fraction off center as if meeting a force that wasn't there. At the end of the short cut, the trailing carry from a side nudged the recovery half a hair cleaner. No one else in the court would have noticed. The summit did. Gareth spoke first. You're expecting contact after contact. Yes, Owen added, and you're preserving the next position inside the first motion. That one hit hard because it used the exact truth I had only half articulated to myself. Lydia's gaze dropped briefly to my feet, then rose. Interesting. Brent frowned. He just looks twitchier. Nina shot him a look sharp enough to sterilize steel. Mila, who had watched the whole line without blinking, said quietly, no. He doesn't. He looks like he's carrying more than one answer. The words settled over the ring with a weight I did not know what to do with, because they were close. Too close. I stepped out of the court before anyone could ask for more. Gareth lifted the practice blade off the ground and looked at me differently than he had after the ritual hall. Not warmly. Not with guilt. With recalculation. We should speak again, he said. Brent gave him an incredulous look. About what? Gareth did not bother answering him. Lydia did. About what the kingdom has not explained. A page crossed the yard then, hurrying toward the annex with a seal case under one arm. Dorian, visible above on the balcony, intercepted him before he reached the door and took the case outright with all the legal grace of a thief who knows the paperwork better than the owner. That gave Lydia a small, humorless smile. There, she said. The next omission arrives. She turned to me. If you gain access to the original review wording, I want to know. I almost laughed at that. You assume I gained access. You're already standing at its edge, she said. Then she went back toward the casting ring because mages in capital courts learn early how to suspend one line of thought without losing it. Gareth was claimed by his knight captain an instant later, Owen by a military instructor with a timing slate, Brent by his own appetite for visible work. Nia touched my forearm once, not gently, not softly, simply marking that the question of my treatment had not vanished because politics had entered the yard then left for the temple hall. That left only Mila for a second longer than the others. She stood with spirit weave threads dim around her hands, looking as though she had meant to say something at 3 different points and mistrusted all 3 versions. Finally she settled on, was it very bad, and called her? Yes. She nodded once. The discomfort in her face did not leave. I'm sorry, she said. For what? Her eyes flicked briefly toward the others, toward the court, toward the old summoning hall that was not visible from here and yet sat between us anyway. I don't know, she said honestly. That was the best answer anyone could have given. Then she left, too. I stood alone in the ring long enough for the attendants to begin pretending not to wait for me to clear it. Dislocation had marked the start of the day. Now it deepened into observation. The capital did not simply ignore frontier truth. It translated it into forms that preserved control. The summoned were not one group in practice, no matter the right that had called us all at once. We had already been sorted by usefulness, then resorted by training, access, prestige, and now information. And yet the lines were shifting. Not neatly, not kindly, still shifting. I left the yard and went up to the annex records wing where Dorian Pike had vanished with the seal case. The corridor outside the archive room smelled of dust, wax, and cloth bindings. Dorian had conquered a side table and covered it with rubbings from the Eastern Ruin, revised report copies, 3 older survey indexes, and 1 thin volume of catalogued peripheral martial iconography whose title alone made me hate the capital on principle. He did not look up when I entered. They reduced the access slab to a structural concern in paragraph 4, he said. I know. They moved the motion figures to appendix language. I know. You are learning to hear theft. That was not praise. It was close enough. He finally looked up then and saw something of the yard still on my face. You saw them. Yes. And some of them noticed I changed. Some of them would notice if the moon cracked. He pushed one report copy aside. Did Marrow ask intelligent questions? Yes, of course. He leaned back in the chair and rubbed one hand over his eyes, leaving a faint charcoal shadow at the temple. The Central Archives gave me a cross-reference while you were downstairs playing social geometry, he said. Not openly. Accidentally. Which is how useful things survive here. He held up one thin record slip between 2 fingers. The heading read, Unstable Peripheral Labyrinth Panel Sequences, Southeastern Survey Cluster, Non-Devotional, Restricted Handling. My pulse ticked once. Labyrinth. Yes. Dorian set the slip down and tapped a line halfway through. 3 years ago, a survey team recorded branching motion carvings in a lower route of the Valadrift Labyrinth and filed them as damaged combat iconography unrelated to active pathways. The notes are terrible. The classification worse. No proper follow-up. I stepped closer. Same style as the ruin. Likely. How do you know? I don't. That's why I intend to look. The room seemed to narrow around that sentence, because I could already see the shape behind it. The capital had chosen discretion, delay, controlled language, quiet engineering at Calder, and no broad alarm. The Eastern Ruin would be watched, measured, hidden under the right headings, and perhaps eventually fed to the correct powerful mouths. Answers would move more slowly than danger. Dorian saw me understand it. Yes, he said. Exactly. He rose and began packing the rubbings with quick, efficient hands. If the court wants the Calder route handled quietly, I will let them perform their quiet theater. Meanwhile, I am not waiting for 5 layers of authorization before checking a site they already buried once under incompetent labels. You can just go. I can go under the authority of Comparative Substructure Review and Regional Labyrinth Hazard Reassessment, which sounds dull enough that only 2 departments will object, and one of them owes me an apology from last winter. He looked at me directly. The real question is whether you are coming. I did not answer immediately, not because I doubted the impulse, because saying yes carried more than travel. Calder's blood and stone were still in me. Alden was still on a cot. Tara would likely call the entire idea insane before accurately packing me for it. The summoned yard below still held all the old sorting lines with new fractures running through them. And yet beneath all of it, the hunger that had begun in the ritual hall and sharpened at every ugly say says since the weak push, the breath smoothing, the slip on the block, the thread marks, the branching carvings, the chamber Fike had found in shade no yard could satisfy now. Not power, context, a place where the pieces might become a language. Dorian waited without filling the silence. At last I asked, why me? That earned me a look almost offended by the necessity. Because the carvings of earmarks, thieves use some linen so ever you blurf the thieves I your labels his note in Spain treated the job heaven clay the covers of this and it's of an end and the drag of pahidi into ruling the suddenly added matter. That was Dorian Pike's version of invitation. It was enough. Well, at dawn tomorrow if I can keep the authorization wording ugly enough to pass. He tied the rubbing case closed. Later if the palace interferes, but not much later. Delay is how control grows roots. I looked at the labyrinth slip again. Unstable peripheral panel sequences, non-devotional, restricted handling, another burial by title, another place where attached meanings had been filed under something safe and stupid. Renewed hunger is too gentle a phrase for what settled into me then. Not frenzy, not triumph, direction hardened by insult. The capital would polish the truth flat if allowed long enough. Climb, then I would go where the stone had not yet been made to lie so neatly. Dorian slid a sealed note across the table. For the infirmary in the morning, he said. So Quill doesn't murder the messenger. I took it. You assume she won't murder me. I assume she will consider it and choose education instead. That sounded accurate. I tucked the note into my coat and looked once more through the high window toward the training court where the summoned paths had begun to bend away from simple hierarchy into something more unstable and real. Gareth's blade flashed white below. Lydia's starfire turned in contained geometry. Mila's threads moved like thought. Some of them were beginning to see that the kingdom had not told us everything, but they would need that discomfort later. For now, Dorian closed the satchel, lifted the rubbing case, and said, "Get sleep while the capital still thinks you belong to its schedule." I turned toward the door. At the threshold he added, without looking up from his papers, "Cross." I glanced back. The labyrinth record describes one panel where a single strike branches into 4 consequences. My hand tightened around Tara's note. Dorian finally met my eyes. "If the court wants the question, Barry," he said, "we'll take it somewhere deeper."